All right, Mr. Lee Bratcher, thank you so much for being with us. The Center of Excellence for Digital Ethics at Dallas Baptist University, and this is our home. So thank you for representing DBU so well in everything that you do, and also in this interview. We have a lot of topics to tackle with a lot of the folks that come in for the interviews, but yours, what is dear to your heart, is more in the blockchain space. So would you tell us how you see digital ethics in that space today?
Sure. And Paula, thanks for inviting me for this conversation. It's an honor. In regards to blockchain, I got into blockchain several years ago from a philosophical, economic incentive perspective, studying political science and land registries and property rights, real property. And when I started to study blockchain and the distributed ledger technology applications in land, I really started to see how the transparency and immutability properties of blockchain could be a boon for especially developing countries that have problems with corruption and violence, even in regards to ownership, property rights, and land. And so that has led me down a path on studying blockchain in general, and I've been impressed at times, and then also concerned at times with different directions that I've been seeing it going. And there's so many use cases out there now that are starting to percolate to the surface, and so many that have already shown themselves for naught. They were all hype with no substance.
Mm-hmm.
So really finding out where this technology brings value is really important. And in those spaces where it does bring value, how do we ensure that the privacy concerns and the ethical concerns are being accounted for when the value-bringing mechanism is going to be a profit-loss function?
Right.
So that takes some skilled leadership at the top.
Yes. Where is that top?
Well, I've seen surveys, and we've both looked over surveys from IBM that suggest that the CEOs themselves don't really feel like their place is to be answering the questions about ethics and privacy. They would rather the board of directors or a CIO or CTO handle those, and I think perhaps that is, in certain circumstances, okay. But I think the majority of the time, the CEO needs to take time to be in the room and educate himself or herself on the issues at hand, so that as they make other decisions that impact the entire organization regarding the business structure, the business development, the product side, they have that in the back of their mind, and maybe even it starts to move towards the forefront of their mind. And that will probably be uncomfortable for them to hear, but it's just like a muscle. We need to have them exercise it a little bit, just like the CTOs do.
That's a perfect comparison. Thank you. I think that great point, the fact that it is technology and technologically based, and it tends to sit on the side of the CIO or the CTO, when that's really not where the issue lies. So how we use the tools, or how we use anything that an organization owns in terms of assets or leverages, really belongs to CEO and board. But they have a hard time seeing that because it is so digital, and because it is not something. Blockchain took a long time to be understood by even technologists, so much less it's hard to explain the nuances of that to somebody in the business. Nevertheless, we have, in the compliance field, for instance, we have a lot of safety regulations and bribery regulations that have nuances, but the board and the CEOs have had to understand. So as a blockchain expert, how would you think is an easier path to convey to the business that they should be involved? How would you bridge that communication?
It's a great question. I think it's dependent on the industry. Some industries, the blockchain applications are going to be tertiary and have less implications for privacy and ethics. But in some industries, it's pretty central. And so in those cases, and probably we'll flesh out in this conversation where those industries are and how we should finance. Financial services obviously is one of those.
Yes.
Digital identity, financial services. Anytime the governance and the private sector is interacting with the government as it pertains to citizens, that's also going to be an area. But there again, you'll see supply chain logistics with certain blockchain use cases that bring efficiency, and perhaps, don't hear me say no privacy and ethics implications, but fewer than the ones that we mentioned just a few seconds ago.
Do you see the design of the blockchain or the design of the mesh to be superior one to the other in terms of ethics? Is that even a consideration when deciding? Let's say there's a space that will require a lot of an ethical oversight.
Yeah.
Would one system over the other be better?
Yeah, I think that's got to be one of those things in the columns of when you're coming with the SWOT analysis and trying to determine which permissioned versus hybrid versus permissionless, which kind of blockchain you're going to use for the use case. And right now, we're only looking at what makes the most sense as far as throughput, transactions per second, efficiency, and the dollars and cents of it. And I say we're only looking at that. There are certainly people that are looking at the privacy and ethical implications, but it's not part of the conversation from the get-go, and it probably should be.
It should be. I think it's a space that is ripe for opportunity, and at DBU, having the expertise that we have, and with your center as well, with global engagement, I think that it's important to lead in that space. This is just for the future. Perhaps we can roll out some things that help the community, the blockchain community, and the privacy community converge and be able to find mechanisms to accelerate that ethical component. So stay tuned. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts in terms of some efforts and global efforts to create some regulation around not around, but on top of the blockchain that, in my mind, bring me back to the days of a bit more centralization, which is it goes against the very essence of the blockchain and why it came about. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, from a 30,000 foot view, we saw the need for regulation in KYC and AML, and also the need to for enterprises to adopt blockchain. They couldn't necessarily use Bitcoin because of the anonymity and the regulations already on the books regarding know your customer and anti-money laundering. So it's this balance again, because if you start to move too far away from decentralization, then you're right, you're back to where we are right now, or where we were 10 years ago. And I think there will be people who try to find that space in between the pure permissionless, Bitcoin maximalist view, and then on the other side you have pure enterprise, not really blockchain at all, permissioned, private, and perhaps those have their uses, but
it's more of a registry. It becomes just a very formal registry,
right?
As opposed to that consumption, that free market consumption.
Yeah. So it's hard to say. I think in any one of those, and it's on a continuum too. So you've got tons of stuff here in the middle as well, and in any spot in there, there's going to be applications that it makes more sense to use that. So how do we bring about like ethical and privacy concerns, bring those to the table for discussion, even when we start to see blockchain diverge into sort of a more centralized space? Whether that's good or bad, I won't comment on, but how do we generate that conversation when it needs to be had early on, when you're looking at deploying that technology?
Country by country, since you are involved in the Institute, would you say that there are flavors of the blockchain rollout that are appreciated more in certain countries and because of the ethical foundation of that approach?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was on a call this morning with INATBA, which is a European blockchain standards body, and they have different working groups. And it was particularly on land registries. And the Republic of Georgia was one of the first countries, in addition to Sweden, to institute a blockchain-based land registry. And they used Bitfury. And Bitfury provided them with everything for free, transaction costs, infrastructure, just so that they could prove the concept. And of course, they have bigger designs on how that's used. I haven't looked into, and that concerns me a little bit with Bitfury because of all the different investor groups or people with control over that organization. And Georgia came at it, the Republic of Georgia, they came at it from the perspective of, okay, we already have trusted institutions, which when they said that I questioned a little bit. Former Soviet state, constant conflict with Russia. Even a few years ago, tanks were rolling over the border. So I wondered, okay, maybe that's a political, she needed to say that so that there was some political factors at play there. But they said that they brought it on for efficiency and lowering transaction costs for real estate transactions. And that made sense, but I couldn't help but think there's also some serious security, privacy implications here, and there's corruption everywhere. The corruption index, there's no country without corruption, and last time I checked, Republic of Georgia wasn't on the top of the corruption index. It's Norway and it's Denmark, and so I wonder, it really depends on the region and their history on what kind of blockchain should they try to incorporate it. Former Soviet states that have problems with public trust in institutions, perhaps they need to be more on the permissionless side. Because, they were, to them credit, they were on the Bitcoin blockchain using Bitfury. I just was concerned with the Bitfury involvement. They were on the Bitcoin blockchain, which most countries would not allow their land registry to be duplicated on a purely public permissionless ledger. So you've got this continuum again on this space where places like Western Europe and the United States have trusted institutions for the most part, and governments that are pretty, they don't want to, they have data silos, they don't want to necessarily give that out. And so we sort of have to see how that will evolve with Western countries, because they will certainly not allow permissionless Bitcoin blockchain application, just hashes, obviously, of the land registry data on the Bitcoin blockchain. Right. But then we lose all of the benefits of blockchain if we go to this side over here that we've already talked about.
That's right.
Because the players involved, maybe this works for a business network of companies, this permissioned environment. But the players involved in governance, you have attorneys and the state, which is counties in this case, the buyers and the sellers, the banks. There's a lot of different players involved, so you can't go fully to the permission side of things.
Yes, great point. Some risk indicators that you would see from those countries where, as you're analyzing the patterns, is it successful, is it not, what would you be looking for to tell you they did not make a perfect choice, they have to adjust the model?
Yeah, so I think if you look at investment in property, if people feel that their property rights are being more protected and there's greater trust in the process, which blockchain hopefully can bring, and they feel confident in the privacy protections, we're obviously going to have to permission some of the amounts of information that are available to the public. You want hashes, and you got to have public keys, and you got to have ownership information, but you can't keep going down that road and show the whole transaction, interest rate,
That's right.
Data. There's a lot of things that you have to protect. So if the citizens start to feel confident in this system, then they're going to invest more in their property. So it's a kind of a long play, but Hernando de Soto talked about this in Mystery of Capital. If you start to see greater investment in, a commercial or residential property area that was, maybe part of a pilot, on a blockchain pilot, then, we know the citizens have confidence that their data is protected in the part that needs to be, that there's transparency such that their neighbors can, verify, or, anyone with a smartphone or internet access can double check what the land registry is doing, whereas previously it's who gets to the office first with the most amount of bribe money.
That's right. Yeah.
So the proof will be in the pudding, but it's a long, we'll need some studies on investment and some surveys on confidence, and
yes, which is really based on perception as well.
It's true.
So we're still back to having to leverage the wave of perception as opposed to the wave of what's true or what is not,
right,
and how good is it or not.
Right.
Estonia, not too far away from Georgia, completely digital in so many ways, with a digital ID.
Yes.
And that type knocking at our door in the U.S. is a lot of conversation about that. What are your thoughts on that from an ethical perspective?
Yeah, I mean that we're opening up we're diving into the rabbit's hole on digital ID and Estonia, the Baltic states, what they've done, and voting. I mean, we have to throw voting in the conversation because right now in this COVID-19 environment, we are hitting a wall where we're going to have to disenfranchise voters unintentionally, or there's a trade-off between public health and disenfranchisement. We're experimenting with voting by mail, but that's not very efficient. Not everybody can do that. And not everybody has time to wait in social distance lines that are triple the amount of time that it took to vote in a non-COVID environment. So Estonia is going to be able to vote on their blockchain using digital ID, and they're going to be able to confirm that where they place their vote is where that vote was counted. Yes. Because right now, it is powerful, because I don't even know that right now in the United States. I have a fair amount of trust in our system, and I think corruption in voting in the United States is very minimal. But I can't do that right now. I can't go on and just confirm. Now, I wouldn't probably, because I have enough trust. But if there is a point at which that starts to wane, we would perhaps want that ability to do that. So I think what they're doing is impressive. They've had to do it for security reasons because the Russians are intent on cyber attacks on their digital infrastructure.
Yes.
So necessity is the mother of innovation at times.
Yes, it is.
The Israelis are incredible at information security, and they've had to be. So the luxury that we live in the United States and in Western Europe has lulled us to sleep a little bit in regards to these kinds of things. So I'm curious to see where it goes with Estonia and how this experiment continues to play out. But right now it seems very promising. And so back to the digital ethics question of the digital ID and self-sovereign identity. So digital identity, I want to make a quick caveat that when you say self-sovereign, for some people that aren't in the technology space, that has a negative connotation, especially in Texas. There's self-sovereign citizens that don't obey law enforcement.
Negative or positive, depending on who you're talking to.
Right, because perhaps with the citizens, they don't think that they need a driver's license to drive. And that idea, I think, is valid, but the way it plays out is antagonistic and can rub people the wrong way. But if you had a sort of a digital identity that interfaced with, our governing bodies, and that's tricky, right? Then perhaps there is some space to have the government be comfortable engaging that conversation, because I don't think they're comfortable yet. And we know as Christians that we're to respect the authority that God has placed over us, but also we know that we should hold them to a high account, and there's standards that we expect of our elected officials and the public servants that they put into place to kind of administer these programs. So I kind of want to throw the question back on you a little bit on digital identity. Do you see that the United States is ready for something like Estonia?
That's a great question. I would love to, I think that question merits a better answer if we could get to a level of education where all of the viewpoints are presented openly and transparently. If we had a medium through which we could have all of the disparate voices be heard with equal amount of weight, then we could, as citizens, have a better understanding of what the good and the bad reality is. But we might be more likely to hear just from corners that are promoting it a lot, more than from corners that are not. And that form of censorship, whether it is organically or on purpose, however, you don't hear much of those voices. So then it leaves you with having a wrestling with where do I get more information about, how do I know the details, and what is everybody else thinking that is not just promoting it heavily. Then I think we stand a good chance of making the right decision. So the ethical battle, if you will, from my perspective, is getting those voices up and raised, and in a very civil way, in a very open and transparent way. But one of the elements, it brings me back to one of the elements of your mention before regarding the disenfranchised voices. We know that we have, even in Texas, a large number of people that are not connected to the grid. So if their vote is just as important, and if it is going to be that we need to have voting online, in whichever fashion, someday in the blockchain, today without it, how do we get the vote in the right way? Do we need to force to the grid, which is already a force action as opposed to a choice? And one of the core tenets of who we still are here in the US is about the choices that we can make. If we trample on one to get to the other, and we don't have an open conversation about that, then we're stuck again. And then, long answer to your question, but then it brings us right back to the philosophical view. Are we leveraging a utilitarian view, which is not who we are as a country, but it's more common in other parts of the world? And if we are leveraging a utilitarian philosophy, then that disenfranchising component fits. But again, that's not who we are at the core. So do we violate?
Yeah,
it's a hard
issue.
Yeah.
Very much so.
But the more we talk about it virtually or in person, the more we can educate each other on the choices and the mechanisms and come to a better conclusion. I think that's an important battle to tackle.
Yeah, and with digital identity too, I wonder if we really understand what we're giving up right now.
That's right.
As a society. And certainly some people do, especially people that work in the digital ad space or data science space. They sort of see and are paid to amalgamate information and data and then turn it into profitable information, which is good if those people that information is being pulled from realize and are acquiesce to the data being used in that way. And right now we're on the side of full acquiescence. We always accept the terms of use and we cannot read it because we don't have time. There's no one with time or legal training. No one. Very few people that have the time plus the legal training to go through a 26-page terms of use.
Or 50 pages, right?
Or 50 pages.
And then have the disposition to say, I really need to use this tool, but I'm not going to sign the terms. Who do I contact?
Right.
Which ultimately ends up with voting with your money as well and your attention. Do you buy another product? Are you just signed a contract with this one? You have to use it for the year? And what? What does that mean?
And I think digital identity can make that easier. So if we have digital identity, then there's a more digestible function on a smart device or a computer or whatever you're using to sort of look at those micro situations and make a determination about your data and your privacy and how much you're going to give up. And right now that just doesn't exist because it doesn't make sense economically. The transaction cost would be too high for companies to try to do that. And so I don't blame them for the way they do it now. But if we had digital identity and it was on a blockchain, then just like the efficiency and the transparency of voting becomes a little bit more transparent and easier, then you have that micro situation where you're able to determine, okay, now I am okay with this information being used for this purpose, but this information I won't keep private. Right now we just have to say it's all public and I get a free service. I'm getting to use XYZ browser, or I'm getting to use this semi-free. I think we need to start using the term semi-free,
yes.
Because it's not fully free.
It's not. That's right. We are the product along the way.
We are.
The 51% that is in the back of a lot of people's minds that are not in blockchain. So the design, of course, has that component of as long as 51% indicates that this is accurate, this is true, then that's what it is. But then there are some that feel that, well, that is corruptible. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've seen it be corrupted, not necessarily on the Bitcoin blockchain, but with other hacks. People may or may not be familiar with the Mt. Gox attack, where millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars were stolen, and others, and you can sort of Google that and figure out what happened there. So in a proof of work blockchain, if 51% of the miners, which is just people working on nodes, agree, as you know, I'm kind of saying this for the benefit of our viewers and listeners, then the order of transactions can be changed. And if you can change the order of transactions, then you can place transactions where, while it has a certain balance at a different point in the chain, which enables you to double spend or duplicate or steal whatever that asset is, whether it's a cryptocurrency or a piece of, 1/10 ownership in a sailboat. I don't know, I'm just kind of throwing it out there. But whatever that asset is, digital or a digital representation of a real asset, it can be stolen. And we've seen that in certain blockchains, there is enough economic incentives for the miners, and there's enough disintermediation and distance where they don't really care about, so their incentives to remain factual, and I don't use the word truthful on purpose because they're really just
very good. Yes.
They're just remaining factual.
Yes.
Are high enough that you see very few actors trying to be malicious, and if they are, they don't get anywhere close to 51%. I do have a little bit of concern about China's hashing power. If a government can control the hash rate of private companies in a country, we need to be careful there. But I'm glad to see the United States is building data warehouses and hashing power to sort of make sure that China doesn't gain too much of an upper hand there. But the point I think that you're getting at is we're entrusting the majority with what's truth.
Yes.
And that's a problem.
Yes.
So we always have to be looking at the incentives because we do that in a sense today, and we've done that throughout human history, going back to the law merchants of the medieval period and the Renaissance period in Italy. The reason why we were able to trade with the Silk Road, the first Silk Road, almost not quite 1,000 years ago, began to emerge, is because of double entry bookkeeping and these accounting practices that allowed for this kind of trade.
Yes.
So there was trust there in a third party entity, and we've continued to evolve upon that until we get to this place where we are now. So I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with entrusting what is factual to miners, but we have to be very careful how we do that because their incentives matter a lot. And if their incentives get out of whack, then we have to quickly call out that network and say, this could be false. And if a network that holds millions of dollars of assets, whether digital continue pursuing transparency and distributed ledger technology with the risks that are inherent there.
If I'm listening to you correctly, it sounds to me like we cannot build on hope or design on hope.
Right.
We've got to design with a lot of risk mitigation.
Right.
And even though it is a new space, the risks that will come or that are there, the issues that might come, are exactly the same as in any other kind of platform, whether it's digital or not.
Right.
We bring along with us the problems, right, wherever we go, and we
Human
bring
nature.
along the solutions.
Yes.
So for the students that maybe are listening, or peers, or folks in other industries that are listening and saying, well, blockchain is not my thing, I don't quite understand it. And from a digital ethics perspective, we feel that everybody needs to get somewhat involved or be aware. What would be words of wisdom for them on how they can get involved, learn more, be a part of a community, just have a say in what's happening? How would you encourage them?
Yeah, it's going to take some deep work, which is the title of a book that Cal Newport, I think, is the author. He talks about we don't have much deep work in our culture today. We're very distracted, and I even find that if I keep my phone on my desk, if I come to a difficult problem that I'm trying to use a lot of brain power to solve, or that requires a lot of mental energy, I'll pick up my phone to see if there's something easy to distract me.
That is so true.
It is so true. So I will literally put my phone on a end table at the end of my office, so I can't pick it up.
True.
So we need deep work. We need to actually dive into, we can watch 2-minute videos on YouTube about blockchain. That's a start. But we're going to have to pick up a book, and we're going to have to, read through some in-depth blog posts.
Yes.
And we're going to have to do it in a non-distracted way. We can't educate ourselves about data privacy and blockchain and these things in 15-second, scrolls on our phones. So we're going to have to really spend some time on it. And I'm all about incentives, so until the incentives for the public are to learn about this, then they won't do it. Unless there's just any, curiosity in some people that will drive them to do it, but the majority need to be incentivized in some way. And so...
because it means stealing time from something else that they might like more.
Yeah, whatever their job is, or binge watching on Netflix, hopefully not that, or spending time with their family, or some other vocation. And it can't be manipulated incentives from a sort of, big brother perspective. It has to be naturally occurring incentives. And that's what, Adam Smith talked about in Wealth of Nations centuries ago. So we need to think about how do we encourage people to do this deep work, and where their incentives are going to be coming from. And I don't know. I would be remiss if I claimed that I could tell you how those incentives, because there's a lot of smart people that are thinking about this, way smarter than me, trying to incentivize people to be more informed on a myriad of different issues, and digital ethics in particular, and blockchain in particular.
Yes.
So how do we design those incentives? I do know one thing: it is going to require focused attention, and
which is something we're lacking.
We need to rebuild that into our daily activity.
Do you find that the next generation, the generation that is growing up with blockchain right now, has an easier time understanding it, or is it still a hard concept even for those that have it around them from the start?
That's a great question. I think there's elements that are easier and elements that are harder. Someone who may be in a generation that has come before, they probably have the capacity to do more deep work than millennials and whatever Gen Y, Gen Z have, but they have less technological literacy. So they have strengths and they have things that they need to have weaknesses. Whereas people in the millennials and younger have much more technological literacy, and people these days are born with an iPhone in their hands, but they perhaps don't have the focus. They don't see the need. They're not concerned with some of the philosophical and economic implications about their data privacy that people in their grandparents' generation and probably even their parents' generation are in sort of this middle space. But so each group has strengths and weaknesses and probably could teach the other group a lot. And so, us as millennials, born 1980 to whatever, 99, that 20-year space, we're kind of in the middle. We weren't born with an iPhone in our hand, but we've had to quickly adopt it for our employment and for our vocation. But we've, lacked a little bit of that intellectual rigor from the generations before us.
I think that's a fair statement. Being on the Gen X side, I think that we got to taste we grew up and even part of college without the whole automation, digitization. We were still doing papers, typing them to some extent. And then for those of us who moved on to being a technologist, we got to taste all of the innovation on this end. And we can remember both sides and connect them well. And maybe that is a generation that can help a bit more the others, especially the technologists that are over 50 or so, over 45, over 50, that are still playing in both fields. So words of hope and encouragement to those that are listening, that you have a tremendous calling here. If you understand blockchain and you have a passion for seeing good governance and good constitutional embracement of it, then we need you, and we need you to get involved. And you are spearheading a lot of things. We'll make sure that we have a moment for the IGE, and if you just wish to convey that to our audience.
Well, and we're grateful. Paola is a member of the Institute for Global Engagement and a senior fellow for digital ethics. So it's a great partnership that we have. And ethics is actually one of the core principles within the IGE. We have 3 research areas. We're looking at free enterprise and public policy and ethics and our Christian worldview, and how should that affect our engagement in the public square. And we must be engaged winsomely. If we're not engaged, then we're failing as Christians. If we are engaged in such a way that is not progressing the gospel, is turning people away by our tenor and our tone, then that's a problem too. So it's a tough balance. And so we're striving for that with the Institute for Global Engagement, not always succeeding. But senior fellows like yourself help us get to that spot where we're engaging culture winsomely about these issues of ethics and markets and public policy, and it's very important. So I guess another teaser: look for future publications, webinars, and when we can do in-person events again too, we'll pursue those on these 3 topics.
And I think underlying theme here is that we can talk about almost anything that is difficult if we come at it from a point of sincerity and compassion, and we can communicate with others in a very, very, in a Christian loving way, still disagree, but as long as we come to the table with that full civility and that sincerity of heart and that humility, we might come away having more in common than if we didn't.
Yeah.
So there is a space definitely for us to engage, and to engage with everyone that will lend an ear.
Yeah. And that relational connection too.
Yes.
Come away with that. Are able to be maybe the resource for later on when they have deep worldview questions. And they thought, wow, that was a great conversation. I respected their humility and their willingness to listen to me. I'm having a crisis in my worldview. I want to touch base with them, even though I don't see eye to eye on a lot of issues.
Right.
And again, I'm making some generalizations, but on the whole, we've lost that in this era of social media. And I think a lot of other factors in addition to social media have contributed to that. And that's a whole other conversation for another
It
day.
is.
But
It
we
is.
need to regain
We do. So part 2 is coming. Thank you, Mr. Lee Bratcher, for being here with us. It is an honor. And thank you to our audience, whether you are professionals or junior folks starting your profession or students at DBU or elsewhere. Stay tuned. Thank you so much.